They say true heroes are often the quietest ones. Not every act of courage is captured by cameras, and not every sacrifice is written in history books. Some heroes walk among us unnoticed, sweeping a sidewalk, raising a flag, carrying a past no one dares to ask about. This is the story of Walter Douglas, a man thought lost to war, who returned not with medals or parades, but with silence, and a duty that never ended. Stay with me, and let's uncover the truth of a soldier's sacrifice, hidden in plain sight. If you believe forgotten heroes deserve to be remembered, don't forget to follow, like, and share this story. The eastern gate of Fort Richardson stirred awake each morning before the sun had fully broken across the horizon. Trucks rumbled in, soldiers marched out, and the air carried the sharp rhythm of duty. Amid this daily tide of uniforms and weapons, there was another figure, smaller, slower, almost invisible to most eyes. At precisely 5:45 a.m., Walter Douglas appeared, broom in one hand, bucket in the other, moving with a steadiness that belied his 70 years. His faded blue cap was pulled low over his eyes, the same cap he wore day after day, as though it had fused with him. His jacket, once navy but now an indeterminate gray, hung loosely from shoulders that, despite their age, still carried a soldier's straightness. His boots scuffed quietly against the pavement as he swept, each stroke deliberate, every bend to pick up litter purposeful. The young soldiers who hurried past hardly noticed. To them, Walter was part of the scenery, like the flagpole, like the security cameras, like the endless fencing. He was the old man with the broom, always there, always silent. Some ignored him, some tolerated him, and a few found him amusing in a cruel way. "Hey, old-timer," Private Jenkins called out one brisk morning, his words sharp as frost. "You applying for security duty? They might let you guard the trash cans." His friends erupted in laughter, the sound echoing harshly against the concrete walls. Walter did not flinch. His broom continued its steady rhythm, brushing leaves and cigarette butts into his bucket. His eyes, hidden under the brim of his cap, never lifted to meet theirs. "Probably homeless," another soldier muttered, loud enough for the insult to land. "Bases attract them like flies. They think they'll get handouts." But Walter never asked for food, never begged for coins. He came, he swept, and he left before the morning shift was complete, a shadow with a routine. To most of the personnel, he was a harmless eccentric, irrelevant, almost invisible. It was on a cold, rainy Tuesday in October that Private Michael Chen noticed something different. Walter's hands, red and stiff from the damp air, struggled against the wooden handle of the broom. Without hesitation, Chen bought a steaming cup of coffee from the mess hall and placed it gently on the low wall near where the old man worked. Walter paused, glanced at the cup, and gave a single nod before returning to his task. No words were exchanged, no thanks spoken, but the gesture lingered in Chen's mind. That same day, as the soldiers gathered inside, Chen turned to his commanding officer. "Sir, why does he do it? Every morning without fail?" The lieutenant shrugged. "Some people just need routine. Gives them purpose. Best not to disturb whatever peace they've found." Chen accepted the explanation outwardly, but inside he felt a quiet unease. Walter's presence wasn't random. His eyes betrayed something the others didn't notice. Each time an officer's car approached the gate, Walter would straighten slightly, almost imperceptibly. His gaze sharpened, searching before softening back into resignation when the car rolled past. It was as though he was waiting for someone or something that never arrived. One late evening, after returning from leave, Chen's curiosity deepened into conviction. He saw Walter sitting alone at the bus stop near the base. In his hands, cradled like a fragile relic, was a tarnished metal badge. The street lamps cast pale light across his face, and for the first time Chen noticed tears glistening against the weathered lines of his cheeks. Silent tears, not of weakness, but of a grief carried too long. Chen slowed his steps but didn't intrude. He walked past, carrying with him the uncomfortable weight of realization. They had misjudged this man. He was not simply a drifter, nor just a lonely, eccentric, sweeping for purpose. Something deeper held him there, something hidden behind years of silence. From that night forward, Chen's perspective changed. He no longer dismissed Walter as a background figure. He began to watch more closely, the way Walter's posture never bent despite his age, the precision in every movement, the faint echo of discipline that belonged not to the streets, but to a soldier. The other young men continued their laughter, their careless jokes, but Chen kept silent. Somewhere inside him, a seed of suspicion grew, a whisper that the broom in Walter's hand was not the whole story. The old man was keeping vigil, not just sweeping dirt, but sweeping memory, searching with his eyes, waiting for something or someone that only he understood. And while the base marched on, oblivious to the quiet figure at its gate, Private Michael Chen felt the first stirring of a truth that would one day shake the entire installation. A truth hidden in plain sight, carried in the hands of a man the world believed forgotten. The wind sharpened in November, carrying with it new orders and new authority. Fort Richardson had just welcomed a new base commander, a man known for his strict approach to discipline and security. Within days of his arrival, regulations tightened. The smallest deviations were corrected, routines enforced with fresh severity. Walter Douglas, the quiet figure outside the eastern gate, soon found himself caught in the sweep of this change. "Sir, you can't loiter here anymore," a young military policeman said one morning, his tone awkward but firm. "New regulations, security concerns." Walter nodded silently as though he had expected this moment. He gathered his bucket and broom and crossed to the far side of the street. For 3 days, the compromise held. He remained close enough to watch the gate, but far enough not to violate the rules. His posture remained the same, his sweeping steady, though the distance seemed to weigh on him. On the 4th day, 2 security officers approached together, more formal and resolute. One spoke flatly, without room for negotiation. "We've received complaints. You'll need to move along permanently." Walter set his broom against the wall, his voice surprisingly clear. "I don't cause trouble. I just keep things tidy." "That's not your job, sir," the officer replied. "This is a restricted area. Please gather your belongings." Walter bent slowly, his stiff hands reaching for the bucket. As he lifted it, the edge of his jacket caught on something. A small metal box slipped free, clattering to the pavement. The lid sprang open, scattering its contents. A purple heart medal, a weathered photograph of soldiers standing in front of a helicopter, a faded name patch, Douglas. The officers froze. One knelt, lifting the photograph carefully. Along the bottom edge, barely visible under decades of wear, was an inscription, "Bravo 19, Operation Homeward, 1976. The officer's voice softened. "You were military?" Walter's eyes flickered, his hand reclaiming the box with gentle firmness. "Once," he said quietly, "a lifetime ago." The encounter shifted the air around the base. Later that afternoon, Private Michael Chen noticed the security team poring over visitor logs with unusual intensity. One officer whispered into a phone, the words hurried, almost urgent. Chen caught fragments as he passed. Possible match. MIA records. Bravo 19, confirmed before notifying anyone. Chen's pulse quickened. He thought of Walter's sharp posture, his unwavering gaze at the passing officers, the tears on his face beneath the bus stop light. The next morning, for the first time in months, Walter was absent from his post. Chen scanned the perimeter during patrol, uneasy with the silence where the old man's broom usually scraped against the pavement. By afternoon, the air at Fort Richardson seemed to thrum with unseen energy. Vehicles moved with unusual precision, officers hurried in and out of headquarters, and whispers rippled through the ranks. Then, without announcement, a motorcade arrived. A 3-star general's visit was never unplanned, never unremarkable. Yet Lieutenant General Stanley Carter's arrival came without ceremony, without advance notice. Known across military circles as a man of iron reputation and indomitable loyalty, Carter's presence alone was enough to silence speculation. At only 46, he was young for his rank, but his legend was already secure. Soldiers whispered of his survival during a classified mission decades earlier, of the limp he carried as a permanent reminder of that day. Chen, stationed at the perimeter, stood at attention as Carter emerged from a meeting with the base commander. Yet instead of heading to his vehicle, the general paused. His gaze locked on the main gate, fixed on something beyond the fences and guards. "Sir, shall I have your driver?" the base commander began. "Wait," Carter interrupted, his voice taut, his eyes unblinking. Across the street, Walter Douglas was approaching. His bucket and broom swung lightly at his side, his steps slow but determined. He moved with the same quiet persistence as always, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, that the eyes of a general, an entire base, were upon him. Without hesitation, Carter stepped forward, crossing the distance in long strides despite the limp that marked his gait. Protocol dissolved around him. Salutes were ignored. His focus narrowed to a single man. Walter looked up just as Carter reached him. For a moment, time stilled. Neither man spoke. Then Carter's voice broke, raw with disbelief. "My God, is it really you, Douglas? We thought you were dead." The broom slipped from Walter's fingers, clattering against the pavement. "Captain Walter Douglas," Carter continued, his voice steadying with the weight of recognition. "Commander of Special Operations Unit Bravo 19, presumed killed in action, April 17th, 1976. Soldiers froze. The silence deepened as realization spread. Walter's reply came low, almost a whisper. "Not killed, just lost for a while." The base around them seemed to vanish. The general and the old man, bound by a history no one else could yet understand, stood at the threshold of revelation. And for the first time, the invisible figure with the broom was no longer a ghost at the gate. He was a name, a rank, a story resurrected from the silence of decades. The bench near the eastern gate became a place of reckoning. Military police formed a discreet perimeter, ensuring privacy for what was unfolding. Yet word spread faster than orders. Soldiers whispered from the shadows, trying to glimpse the impossible. An old man who had swept their sidewalks, revealed as a ghost of war, returned to life. General Carter sat beside Walter Douglas, the man he had last seen in flames and gunfire nearly 40 years earlier. His voice, usually carved from steel, trembled as he began. "Douglas, we saw the helicopter explode. We thought there was no chance. You were listed as KIA. How are you here?" Walter leaned back, his eyes distant, as though peering into a past that never stopped burning. His words came slowly, carefully, pulled from scars that had never truly healed. "There was a ravine," he murmured. "When the chopper was hit, I fell, woke up in enemy hands. For 2 years, captivity, silence, survival. I never gave them my rank, never gave them the mission." Carter's jaw tightened, his hand clenching on his knee. He knew the weight of those words. Silence under captivity was a different kind of battle, one fought alone, hour by hour. "They released me in a prisoner exchange," Walter continued, his gaze fixed on the flagpole at the gate. "But by then I wasn't the same. Malnutrition, beatings, memory loss. They moved me to a hospital under another name. My face, I didn't recognize it myself. No one connected me to who I had been. By the time memory returned, Bravo 19 was gone. The mission remained classified. And me, I didn't feel worthy of coming back." Carter turned sharply, disbelief burning through his controlled exterior. "Not worthy, Douglas? 7 men came home because of you. 7 lives, including mine, that were supposed to end in that jungle. You bought our time with your own life." Walter's voice dropped. "I failed the mission. We were supposed to bring everyone out. Not everyone made it." Silence stretched, heavy with decades of unspoken guilt. Carter leaned forward, his eyes fierce. "You saved everyone who could be saved. The others?" He paused, his throat tightening. "They were gone before we even reached them. That was on faulty intelligence, on decisions made far above us. It was never on you." Walter said nothing, but his shoulders sagged under the weight of memory. The old man who had swept unnoticed for years was, in this moment, still a commander carrying the ghosts of his unit. Around them, soldiers watched from a respectful distance. Some whispered names they had only seen in dusty files, names tied to MIA records, operations long erased from official memory. And yet here sat the missing piece, flesh and bone, recounting what history had buried. By evening, fragments of the encounter had already leaked beyond the base. Blurry photos of Carter, leaning toward Walter, appeared online. Captions speculating wildly. Rumors swirled, an MIA soldier returned, a cover-up exposed. Within a week, the whispers became official action. A ceremony was announced, attended not only by Fort Richardson's personnel, but also by surviving members of Bravo 19, summoned from across the country. The Department of Defense sent high-ranking officials. The press gathered discreetly, allowed only limited coverage. When the day arrived, Walter Douglas stood in uniform for the first time in decades. The medals, the insignia, the sharp cut of fabric, all foreign and familiar at once. His posture straightened instinctively, the weight of a commander returning to him. The hall fell silent as his record was corrected. Not killed in action, but retired with honor. Medals long overdue were pinned to his chest. Back pay with decades of interest was formally presented. Offers of housing and care were extended with solemn respect. Yet Walter accepted it all with quiet dignity, his eyes betraying neither pride nor bitterness. At last, when asked what he wanted, he spoke simply. "I'd like permission to raise the flag at this base each morning." The base commander hesitated, glancing at General Carter. Without a pause, Carter nodded. His voice rang clear for all present to hear. "Captain Douglas has earned the right to raise any flag on any base for as long as he wishes, and I consider it a personal honor to see him do so." The hall erupted in applause, not the rehearsed kind of protocol, but the raw sound of soldiers who understood they were witnessing something greater than ceremony. Later, a junior officer, bewildered by the exception granted, asked Carter quietly, "Sir, isn't this unprecedented?" Carter's reply would be remembered, recorded, repeated for years to come. "I've lived 46 years that weren't meant to be mine. I raised children who wouldn't exist if not for him. Every breath I've taken since April 17th, 1976, has been borrowed time, time that Walter Douglas purchased with his sacrifice. If he wants to raise our flag every morning until Judgment Day, then that is exactly what he'll do." And with those words, the truth that had lived in shadows stepped into the light. The old man with the broom was no longer a ghost. He was a hero reborn, not through medals or recognition, but through the quiet affirmation that sacrifice, though unseen, never loses its weight. The forgotten had been remembered. The invisible had been seen. And Fort Richardson would never look at its gates the same way again. Dawn broke sharp and clear the next morning at Fort Richardson. Soldiers lined up for duty, vehicles rumbled to life, and the flag stood waiting at the base of the pole. But this day was different. A hush spread across the grounds as men and women paused to watch an old soldier take his place. Walter Douglas, no longer a shadow sweeping unseen, stood at the gate in uniform, though he carried no rifle, no orders, only the flag folded carefully in his hands. At precisely 600 hours, he raised it skyward. Every fold, every movement bore the discipline of decades past. The rope clinked against the pole, the fabric unfurled, and the stars and stripes caught the morning wind. From that day forward, Walter became known as the flag keeper. Rain, snow, or blistering heat, he was there every morning, his hands steady, his eyes clear. The flag rose with him, not as a symbol of duty assigned, but of duty chosen, renewed each day by a man who had once been forgotten. Children from the families on base began gathering to watch. At first, it was curiosity, an old man with a soldier's posture, lifting the flag as though it were sacred. But curiosity turned into reverence. They listened when he spoke, not about medals or victories, but about the values that had carried him through captivity and silence. "Duty isn't what you do when everyone's watching," he would tell them softly. "It's what you do when no one will ever know." His words spread beyond the gates. The military academy, 50 miles north, established the Walter Douglas Library of Military Ethics, a place where cadets studied his case, not for tactics, but for questions of loyalty, sacrifice, and moral strength. His life became a lesson, not about battlefield maneuvers, but about the invisible courage required to endure, to give, and to expect nothing in return. General Carter, before his own retirement, ensured that Walter's legacy shaped more than memories. He introduced the Douglas Protocol for missing in action cases, a reformed system to make certain no soldier would slip through administrative cracks again. Walter's years of anonymity became the foundation for change, a safeguard for the future. On his 80th birthday, the base organized a quiet celebration. No parades, no spectacle, just heartfelt tributes. A new flag for his apartment, handwritten cards from the children who watched him each morning, a walking stick carved by a wounded warrior, inscribed with words of gratitude. Carter, now retired, presented him with a Brotherhood coin bearing the Bravo 19 insignia on one side and Walter's own words on the other. Duty when no one is watching. That night, Walter confided in Carter, his voice low with wonder. I never expected to be remembered. Carter's reply was steady, affectionate. That was always your blind spot, Douglas. You never understood your own impact. 5 years later, Walter passed away quietly. His funeral was a full military honor, attended by hundreds, active duty personnel, veterans, families, and children who had once gathered at dawn to watch his ritual. The casket was draped with the flag he had raised for years, folded with the same precision he had taught them all. But perhaps the most powerful tribute came not at the funeral itself, but the following morning. Across 7 military installations where members of Bravo 19 had served, 7 flags rose simultaneously. Each was raised by a young soldier who had heard Walter's story and volunteered for the honor. Each fold was identical, each motion deliberate, a silent echo of the man who had taught them the meaning of unseen duty. Afterward, the flags were carried to local schools, presented with the same message. Heroism isn't about recognition. It's about doing what's right when given the choice. Years later, his story still lived on, not in grand monuments or public fame, but in the quiet rituals of soldiers, in the libraries of cadets, in the whispered lessons parents gave their children. Walter Douglas had been invisible, sweeping dust outside a gate he once commanded. His greatness had never depended on recognition. Perhaps it was even defined by his refusal to seek it. In a world obsessed with headlines, with validation and spectacle, his life was a reminder. The truest courage often hides in plain sight, carried by those who ask for nothing. The janitor, the bus driver, the doorkeeper. Any one of them might carry a story like his, if only we looked long enough to see. So let us look again. Let us notice the silent ones, the forgotten ones, the ones who serve without spotlight. For in their quiet persistence lies the heart of heroism. Walter Douglas lived and died as proof that the most enduring legacy is not glory, but the willingness to give without demand. And if one morning you see someone standing at dawn, lifting a flag with careful hands, pause, watch, and remember. Behind such quiet gestures may live a sacrifice deeper than any of us can imagine, because not all heroes make the headlines. Some, like Walter, choose to serve quietly, reminding us that true glory lies not in recognition, but in the unseen weight of duty carried to the very end.